Michael Saylor is now facing a class action lawsuit against him and against Strategy, his company, formerly known as MicroStrategy. And this whole situation is raising a lot of questions right now. What's this all about? Could this bring down MicroStrategy? Michael Saylor was already involved in a financial scandal back in 2020. Back then, it was about accounting at MicroStrategy. Now, however, he is being accused of the company making false or misleading statements and failing to disclose important information in the context of its Bitcoin strategy. And of course, this is really strange, because on one hand, it's one of the best performing companies in the world. On the other hand, there are now class action lawsuits. The criticism of Michael Saylor is also increasing. More and more people are saying, okay, this is a Ponzi scheme. Here, Michael Saylor is somehow the only major buyer of Bitcoin. First, he's pumping up the Bitcoin price. There aren't any other significant buyers. Second, this could lead to the price dropping in a potential bear market. But let's take a look at the whole situation and see what's really going on. If you don't want Bitcoin to fade into irrelevance, then go ahead and give this a like. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button now so everyone stays informed. That way, the algorithm will push these videos out to more people. It would really be an act of kindness for everyone to finally understand what's going on here. So go ahead and hit subscribe and like now. And the whole story, if you want to know my honest opinion, is in my opinion more like an accusation against Michael Saylor. In other words, this is an attack on Bitcoin, an attack on MicroStrategy. Because honestly, what exactly do these investors want to sue for? I mean, MicroStrategy is already performing incredibly well. Are they trying to sue because MicroStrategy should have performed 100% better? The whole thing is supposed to be a violation of US securities law. The charges against Chairman Michael Saylor, CEO Phong Le and CFO Andrew Kang were also brought here. What's also important here, which specific statements the plaintiffs are actually objecting to, is not known at this time. The supposed frustration of the investors is also hardly understandable, since the company's stock has performed extremely well since April 30th. And we've seen it many times before. Whenever some people are very, very successful, there are smear campaigns, there are people who are jealous, and there are people who just don't like it. And yes, I also understand certain points of criticism that are being raised here. And one point of criticism that is actually quite justified, we can take a look at that too, is that the company is said to have made false or misleading statements in the context of its Bitcoin strategy. We'll take a look at what, in my opinion, could potentially be up for discussion here, but I don't think this will lead to a conviction or anything like that. But it is indeed a critical point where many investors might feel misled or deceived. In any case, the official strategy SEC filing says, by the way, this is from the blog Trainer. I'll link the entire article for you below. It says here, the lawsuit seeks unspecified damages for the class action plaintiffs, interest, attorney fees, costs, and other compensation. We intend to vigorously defend ourselves against these allegations. At this point in time, we can neither predict the outcome of the matter nor provide a reasonable assessment or a range of estimates regarding the possible outcome or loss, if any, in this matter. So, we still have complete uncertainty here. Now, let's take a closer look at the allegations, specifically regarding the expected profitability of the Bitcoin strategy, the risks due to the asset's volatility, and the losses that could arise from the introduction of the new accounting guideline. So that's what this is about: the volatility, the losses, and any risks that are being concealed here. As for profitability, the expected profitability here, that can't really be the issue. I mean, if they're criticizing the expected profitability here, you can't really complain that, I don't know, one of the best performing companies in the world isn't generating enough returns or something like that. The next thing is the volatility. Michael Saylor always says it in every statement. Hey, volatility is vitality. They're actually relying on volatility here. MicroStrategy is a volatility machine. It's even stated in the terms and conditions that Bitcoin is volatile, and so on. There was even an outcry at one point because the terms and conditions now say, MicroStrategy warns about volatility, and some people took that negatively here. But of course, that's just a completely normal standard statement. It's also stated here in the terms and conditions. Well, maybe not in the terms and conditions, but in the, I don't know what you call it, in the filings or something, if you buy a MicroStrategy share. And then there's criticism here as well about the losses that could come with the introduction of the new accounting standard. And that's also what Michael Saylor has always said. The FESP regulation will lead to Bitcoin rising up to 9 million here. Because what we've seen now is that Michael Saylor has always said, we need the FESP regulation. We need the FESP regulation so that Bitcoin is recorded at fair value here. Because before, if you bought Bitcoin for $10,000 and it went up to $1 million, all those gains weren't reflected in the balance sheet. That means these gains aren't included in your earnings, in your revenue figures, because the Bitcoin is still recorded at $10,000 and not at 1 million. And now, this can basically be revalued 4 times a quarter. So now, both the gains and the losses can be recorded here. Now, it actually happened that the first time this was used, the FESP regulation, MicroStrategy didn't make a profit here, but actually made a small loss, simply because Bitcoin corrected at the beginning of the year. But now something interesting is happening. In the second quarter, MicroStrategy will probably make a massive profit here, and this huge profit will also very likely lead to MicroStrategy being listed in the S&P 500 in August. Depending on estimates, it could still take until the final approval, possibly until October, or in the worst case even until December, before MicroStrategy is actually traded here on the S&P 500. But with the next earnings call, it will basically be announced that MicroStrategy has now made very, very large profits. I think the stock price needs to be just above 97,000 US dollars by the end of July or early August, and then they would have this massive profit and could become part of the S&P 500. That would be a complete game changer, because what happens then? Then a huge amount of passive flows would come in, and all the retirement funds in the US would get involved. No, not retirement funds, but all the, what do you call them? Savings plans that are set up for retirement, which are tied to the S&P 500 QQQ, and so on. That would all start flowing, at least in part, into MicroStrategy. Then you get another new wave of passive money flowing into MicroStrategy, into strategy, which can then be used to buy more Bitcoin. So, to pin all of this on the FASB regulation or the accounting guidelines, I think that's really far-fetched. And you can really see here that, in some cases, this is turning into a smear campaign. So, the goal here is probably to harm Bitcoin, to harm strategy, to harm Michael Saylor. And we've seen this kind of attack before, from Ripple and from other companies. And what does MicroStrategy do after this accusation comes out? 10 minutes later they announce, yes, we've just bought 7,000 Bitcoin. So I think MicroStrategy really doesn't seem to care much about this. And they're probably going to, or actually, not just probably, they're definitely going to fight back against it. But we just don't know if there are any secret things going on behind the scenes here. The topic I'm about to bring up is maybe the only one where I actually see some criticism, where you could maybe even call out Michael Saylor a bit, but not really, because if you listen closely, Michael Saylor has said that he's not interested in pleasing traditional investors or satisfying any options traders or anything like that. All Michael Saylor wants to do is generate more Bitcoin per share, and what he's doing right now is fully utilizing all the ATM programs. That means at the market offering rounds, which means stock dilution, and with that, he buys Bitcoin. And right now, we simply have the premium, which is called the MNF, meaning MicroStrategy is trading higher than its underlying assets, so the Bitcoins are worth less than the company is valued at. And now they're using that premium to create dilution, to dilute the shares, in order to buy more Bitcoin. And now some people are saying that the premium isn't really justified, because MicroStrategy also, in its last earnings call or at the shareholders meeting, actually presented a list with about 10 or 12 points explaining why the MNF is justified here. And basically, we have two ways that MicroStrategy can raise money. One is basically debt, and the other is the ATMs. That means debt is, for example, Strike, Strive, that kind of thing, where you might want to tap into the bond market, where you simply want to raise money here in the form of debt. But we can clearly see that the ATM programs are almost maxed out, whereas the debt programs are not really exhausted yet. And now some investors are saying, oh, Michael Saylor only uses the ATMs and all the debt programs aren't being used. And that would be really stupid. And I've also heard some people say that investors are being lied to, because Michael Saylor said you could raise so much debt and accumulate so much debt. And it's not just the case with strategy. It's the same with other companies. They always do everything through ATMs, these treasury companies, and collect relatively little now through debt. And a lot of people criticize that the market just isn't there, that the market is too small. Michael Saylor himself even admitted in an interview that the market isn't really there yet, that the market is tapped out, and that he's already approached all the big players. But the way I understand it, Michael Saylor wants to create this market, which of course is also a potential for the future. And if we now look at the list where Michael Saylor justifies this MNF, we can see that out of the 10 or 12 points, or 15 points, I'm not sure how many there were, about 3 points refer back to the ATM, and all the others basically relate to debt financing. And now some people are criticizing that Michael Saylor is basically justifying the MNF by saying that MicroStrategy can take on debt more cheaply, can somehow refinance itself more cheaply on the capital market, things like that. But that's really just a story, because if we just look at the numbers, this refinancing, this debt financing, isn't really happening that much. Instead, most of it is happening through ATMs. And if that's what's meant here, yeah, then I can understand something like that. But you still wouldn't file a lawsuit over it. It's still not a reason to file a lawsuit here. It's also the case that Michael Saylor probably didn't say he promises people that this will happen 100%. He's basically just trying to raise money here. That's more how I understood it. But maybe I haven't heard all of his interviews or every single statement he's made in detail. I don't know. It's also possible that he's still hiding something here. It could also be that things are happening in the background. You never know. There are often things going on behind the scenes. There are also often misunderstandings or things like that, or people who completely misinterpret things. That's also what's so shady about MicroStrategy. Some banana head will totally misinterpret the MicroStrategy stock, and that's why so many people have a hard time with MicroStrategy. That's also why some people have a really hard time with Strike, and stories like that, because the way they're valued just isn't like a classic company, with a P/E ratio and all that stuff you can usually evaluate. Of course, if you look at it that way, it all seems really bad. You have to look at MicroStrategy from a different perspective. You just have to see, okay, Is it increasing the Bitcoin per share here? If yes, then that's good. If not, then it's not so great. And what's also interesting is whether MicroStrategy will eventually, sooner or later, be able to get a rating. A lot of people say that's the next step to basically raise even more money on the debt side, because right now the strategy isn't really rated, or it's having a really hard time getting rated. And you can see it clearly in the bond market, especially in the US. Everything revolves around ratings. AAA, AAA+, AAA, triple D, triple B, and whatever else there is. And yeah, big investors are sometimes not even allowed to buy anything that isn't rated. That's why I think MicroStrategy is also looking into how they can somehow get some ratings started here. But the way MicroStrategy operates is kind of the opposite of what these rating agencies are looking for. And the rating agencies just say, okay, this is just some nonsense or whatever, and they're not really into it. Which is why MicroStrategy is still having a bit of a hard time there. So I'd say I'm a bit critical about this, but of course, I don't really know all the details or everything that's going on here. If you know any details, feel free to write them down in the comments below. If you're still looking for a place to easily and securely buy Bitcoin, I'll put a link down below to 20 to 1 Bitcoin. Highly recommended. With the code Bitcoin, you can still get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Guys, see you next time. Peace out.